And that's probably going to be a part of like your governance portion or your some other portion of your examination compliance or certification compliance. Okay, so you'll need a method. Either way, you're going to need a method for how you're setting this cut score. The industry method that I spoke about is the modified angle-off. The other one that came to mind was the bookmark method. Somebody might mention another method. Somebody might make up a method. I think either way you do it, either way that you perform your methodology, as long as it's psychometrically sound and it makes sense and there's a logical flow, I think that your assessor will probably accept that as a part of your application. So the next one says copies of all logs, diaries, and personnel lists and descriptions kept as required in the development process. This was relevant for a specific type of job observation that we had used in particular for a credential that we developed for security professionals, where rather than doing a physical on-site job observation, because of the security parameters, because of the security controls that most of them had in place at their jobs, we couldn't do a job observation with them. And so they ended up submitting work logs in order to talk about like what job, in order to list and document the tasks that they performed on a daily basis. And then we, on the back end of that, took those work logs and essentially tabulated frequency and criticality of each task that they documented. In that case, those work logs were submitted along with the application because they were a part of the job analysis. Personnel lists is going to be, for us, is going to be your list of subject matter experts along with their resumes. And that's it. We don't usually have work logs as a part of a job analysis, so it's not always a common thing. But again, there isn't like a hard and fast rule. Generally, when you're submitting an application for accreditation, they want to see these documents if they do exist. If they don't, then you haven't necessarily, there's no change. The documents are not required. It's just if that's a part of your documentation, then you submit it. The other thing mentioned here is the validation report. For us, when we are submitting this type of documentation, we include them as a part of the validation report. So examination validation report will have the results of your job task analysis along with other documentation like the work logs. All of that stuff will be together in the validation report. Other, psychometric vendors or internal sites might do this process differently. As long as the material is there, it's all good. So again, when they said, so then the next one says summary statistics for each examination form. Again, these things for us would be a part of your validation report. Some folks might do that differently, or might submit the material or information differently, but this would all be wrapped up in the validation report. Your item level analysis, your test level analysis, any statistical analysis that's performed on the examination, as well as a summary, is going to be in that annual report. You'll have maybe a longer annual report that's produced And then we might develop a report if there's a change to the examination, and that might actually just be added to your annual report as an addendum. So all that stuff is coming in your validation report. You're gonna get a new validation report along with a job analysis. So you'll generally get like a new or fully updated validation report every 5 or 6 years, alongside however frequently you do your job analysis. The next one says names, credentials, and demographic information for all persons involved in job analysis, item writing, and review. Again, you got to have your resumes on deck. For the creation of a certification, if you're creating a certification for the first time, those subject matter experts are not going to have the certification, right? But you'll be able to produce other documentation, which will generally be included on their resume, which will show that they are in the role and that they've been performing the role for a number of years. This is generally more of a challenge with newer credentials because, you don't have a sort of history, right? With an older credential, you can just pull up subject matter experts with the certification and just put them on a committee together. But with a newer credential, you kind of have to, everybody doesn't have the cert. You're making the cert, so they'll give you leeway there. They'll give you space as long as the resume has the experiential information on it, right? Is this person in the role? Are they performing in the role? If they have the experience there, then you should be fine for this portion. Okay, so then this is at the end, but I kind of started at the back half of the presentation just to go through. And there's one other standard that wasn't on there. And usually I have these numbers kind of top of mind, but you'll also need to look at item exposure. And item exposure is essentially a metric of how frequent, whether your items have escaped. So item exposure is a security portion of the standard, because there are some psychometric components of test security. You'll need to do some test level you'll need to do some item level and some test level analysis to ensure that your items are not out on the street or out on the web, basically. Okay, so let's go back. So I think I kind of covered most all of these things. The upper portion of the slides are more so descriptive, but the table kind of helps me get oriented, because generally when you're doing an application, you're going through the standards and you're making sure that you have everything checked off. And then we just have the descriptions here. But for the most part, as long as you do all of these things, your application from a psychometric perspective is going to be fine. Any thoughts, comments, questions, examples? Yeah, this is the same stuff. Yes, no, yes, no. Most of these applications, most accreditation applications will be, I think most of them do get approved, actually. And even if there is a non-conformity or something in your application that needs to be fixed, they'll give you a certain amount of time to do it. So it's not that if your application doesn't go through the first time you submit it, it's hopeless, like all is lost. So there really isn't, I know sometimes people don't want to, because for each of these folks, there's definitely a fee for submitting the application, whether it's anywhere between, somewhere around $5,000 or something like that, to submit. But it's not like you're going to submit and fail and just get rejected. Generally, it's like you submit and then there will be points that you'll need to correct, and they'll either let you correct them or they'll give you a certain amount of time, depending on their review process, to make those corrections so that your application can be assessed at the next phase of review. But you won't just lose your money. Your application will stay on file until you're ready to address the nonconformities. But most people want to get the application through. So you're just looking for the next review process, and it depends on how frequently their board meetings are, whether they're monthly or quarterly. Some folks will look at your application the next quarter. So you have about 3 or 4 months to address your nonconformities, and then you can just resubmit that application the next go around. The other plug I'll throw in here, since everybody is sort of silently gazing. The other piece that I'll say is that while there are some things that we do as an industry standard, for instance, like job analysis, right? That's not necessarily something that is going to be all that flexible. There's kind of, there are some standards and some guidelines that we work according to based on our industry in order to make sure that you're compliant with your job analysis component. There is always wiggle room in certain cases. I think that I probably speak about this most when it comes to selecting a remote proctoring vendor, because there are some things that we do just because it's common practice, but you can always request a change. If there's some portion of this process or the examination validation process that is not working for you for whatever reason, you can always request a change. Remember that if you're working with a vendor, right, their purpose is to provide you with a service. So there are some things that are not necessarily hard and fast rules where if you request some grace, that you should be able to get it. So that's the only reminder I'll use is if you feel like if you feel like something in your process should be different than what your vendor is providing, that you should communicate as such to them. But I'll add the flip side of that, which is that a lot of the stuff that we do, a lot of the stuff that psychometric vendors do is based on an industry standard. So there might not be a whole lot of wiggle room, but I've seen exceptions to that where, for instance, in job analysis or in practice analysis, right? Some industries have already put out a set of standards or guidelines or like a task list associated with that job or that role. And in that case, does it make sense if you're creating a credential and it's based on a task list of an industry group that's already, published the set of tasks associated with that practice? Does it make sense for you to perform another job analysis? In that case, maybe not. So that's an exception, right? Where you could make a case to say, like, there's already an industry standard here. We shouldn't have to do another job analysis because we're basing this on the task list that is provided by, organization X. So there are some exceptions. There's always some exceptions. As long as you can describe and provide a logic with what you're trying to do, there's always an exception that can be made. Any other questions in this last? Everybody's so quiet. Go ahead.
So there you have to comply with federal requirements. Are there sometimes state requirements as well? Does that depend on the state?
So it depends. I remember one example of a credential developer that wanted to go through, the ANSI as well as the state of Texas. And this was for food. So the Conference of Food Protection had a set of guidelines that she needed to adhere to, but then the state of Texas also had some very specific state level guidelines that they wanted her to adhere to at the same time. And so as we were developing the assessment, we would just go through all the guidelines to make sure that they were consistent. For the most part, they were, but there were some little pieces where one guideline or other would be a little bit more thorough than the other one. And so you just had to go through and, kind of put together a comparison table to make sure that what you were to make sure that your documentation fulfilled all of the requirements for everybody. In a lot of cases, in the case of certification, if you go through one of the larger accrediting bodies like an ANAB or like ICE, that's already a national body. So in a lot of cases that will be sufficient, but the difference is where there's like some state level licensing or something like that, then you'll need to look at the state requirements also. Okay. Contact information slide. Send me a line if you're working on something specific and you're looking to get some more information. Other than that, I'll see you either at the next workshop or at the upcoming ICE conference in Colorado Springs.